Medicare fee-for-service, what you have to look at, guys, the only thing to really focus on is if you have a commercial payer, your billing agencies that look at this, is sometimes the Blue Cross Blue Shield might be a commercial plan plus a Medicare Advantage plan. You need to be able to tease that out. Use the 80-20 principle. You don't get it right all the time. Billing agencies should be able to do that. Just make sure that they're looking at this and annotating it correctly. So let's get into, that's all about transports in the back of your ambulance. Now we know, yes?
That's why you're right there, just right there, when we talked about the different payers and we talked about other, you mentioned commercial, and if it's the patient's portion, it's a deductible or copay, it goes down there. That's also what the Medicare Advantage is.
It's everything.
Okay.
Yes, Medicare Fee-for-Service, yes. Medicare Advantage. Remember those two, because your Medicare Advantage has a high copays, yes. And self-pay, and that's our biggest concern, is why we want to show the difference and why we advocated you have to split all these out, because the benefits are changing. And as they go from fee-for-service to Medicare Advantage, and we're at 48% now, like at our company, we have noticed a huge shift in self-pay, even though they have insurance. Our cost is increasing because it takes a lot longer to get paid from a Medicare Advantage than it does from Medicare Fee-for-Service. So teasing that out is going to begin to show it, and we're hoping this data really if we input it correctly, it will show really the dire issue with EMS. But we just got to make sure we get it set up correct. That's our biggest concern right now. So let's talk about other revenues, because we have been very creative as an industry of getting alternative revenue sources because Medicare has not been paying us adequately. So to keep sustaining, we're either going to do it through grants. We do it through other types of bonds. I mean, there's just so many creative ideas that we're using as an industry to get paid. And so you'll see a ton of questions start coming through here asking you stuff. Now, the one thing that gets a little confusing is contracts from facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, prisons, and things like that you might have. If you bill on a fee-for-service, like what I call daily billing to a nursing home or whatever, so you're billing them for each transport you do, then you're going to put that under your commercial insurance payer type. Does that make sense? But there's a lot of contracts that people have out there that are more like a monthly contract. We charge a monthly fee. We've got an arrangement with the prison system to do something, a hospital, a nursing home, something like that. That's what it's referencing here, is what is that dollar amount of revenue you're receiving from them on what I would call like a capitated type contract. Okay? And then what is the amount of dollar and what's attributable to ground ambulance. So for instance, you might do wheelchair services and ambulance services for a hospital, and they pay you $100,000 a month. But $20,000 of that is associated with wheelchair. This is what that's talking about. Okay, so if you do wheelchair type services and things like that, here's what it's talking to you about. You're going to have to, if you're all under the same NPI number, you're going to have to understand how to allocate that out appropriately. Your revenues for subcontracted ambulance services. Some of you are subcontracting your work out to others. People talked about that here. This is where you put it. Okay, if you're fire and EMS and you're doing the same exact concept, then you would put the percentage associated with ground ambulance. Okay. Your membership fees, if you do a membership program, that's what people call these membership programs that you hear with ground EMS, air ambulance, different things like that. If you've got a membership program, here's what you would do it as. If you have an air and ground, which is common in some, if you have a dual system going on or what have you, then you would want to only attribute the revenue received to the ground ambulance division. Yes?
Contracted area of service, local township has us covered their area because it's logistically better for us to respond. That would fall in this category?
They pay you for that?
Yes, sir.
Then yes, that would fall under the contracted. Charitable donations, anything that you do, but it excludes vehicles or cost offsets reported elsewhere in the instrument. Okay, so if you did something that was a cost offset somewhere else or vehicle related, you do not put it in here. But charitable donations that you might receive, which is very common in volunteer services and fire-based services as well that might receive donations, charitable donations, whether it's from a foundation or what have you, especially if you do education, you might get funds from foundations to help with education. This is where you're going to put those revenues. There's other stuff that's pretty specific depending upon how your stuff, if you've got loan programs for executives, public-private type investments that you might receive monies from, very common on state dollars that with public-private or local dollars that might be received with certain things like that. Any revenue that you receive to the ground ambulance side of it, that you might be under that NPI number, that's where you do. Local taxes that you might be receiving, millages, different things like that. Pretty straightforward, folks. Utilities, if you've got, if you're getting money from some type of subsidy off of a utility rate, this is where you're going to put that information. Bond or debt financing. Here's where you're going to put those revenues. I think somebody talked about bond financing coming in. This is where you put it. Some people are getting like surplus dollars from state and state vehicles, okay, that they might get as well that come into as a source of revenue for their system. Here's where you're putting that information, okay? And if you're a fire and ambulance, this is the reason why you need to understand how that comes in and then allocate only those revenues associated with the ground side of it. Okay, revenue is important with the allocation because you don't want to overstate your revenue for ground ambulance because a lot of that they're going to be looking at to see how that offsets if your costs are high. That makes sense? Here's other donations, but it excludes the stuff that you probably put in that we put into the other parts of the cost side of things, okay? So you're going to see when you're looking at other donations, be specific to make sure. Grants. There's state-specific grants that we might receive. Michigan may have grants that they either codify through statute. It might be giving out through federal dollars that go down to the states, and then the states distribute the money. And that's very, very common. It buys a lot of capital expenditure equipment, different things like that. This is where you're going to record some of that stuff. Some of you guys talked about SAFER grants. Very common if you're a fire-based EMS that's paying. Here's where you're going to record some of that stuff. The revenue is going to come in, and then the cost associated with your grant should be in some of the other allocations of the cost. So if the grant paid for monitors, then you should have revenue coming in for the monitor payment, and then you're offsetting it with the cost of purchasing the equipment, different things like that. Does that make sense? Congressional earmarks. That could be anything from some of these programs that are happening where we talk about Medicaid bridge type funding, where it might be through what we call a certified public expenditure. I don't know. I know there's some type of governmental program. You guys have a kind of a quasi program here. Is that correct? For Medicaid?
We have the QAP.
The QAP. That is going to be a congressional earmark. That's revenue that may not be tied directly to individual, or is it?
It is.
Okay.
The assessment, we pay a tax.
Okay.
Transport, that would go under taxes and.
Okay.
Correct?
Yes.
And then you would report the Medicaid revenue that we get from that under the Medicaid.
Is it on the Medicaid? So it's per transport fee? Okay. Okay. So your QAP would be that way. So you would do it like the cost, whatever.
The tax would go in the cost.
Perfect.
Pay, and then the revenue you get would be reported
On the Medicaid payer category. Okay. So your cost would go into the taxes that you pay, and then the revenue piece you're not going to worry about here as a congressional earmark. In some states, it's kind of a lump sum payment that you get every quarter, and so we would have to record it here and not under the Medicaid payer category. Okay? As revenue. So it depends upon how your state has things designed. But that's what congressional earmarks are. There are some federal congressional earmarks that give you money for education, different things like that you might be utilizing in your area as well. That's where you would put that other stuff. And if it doesn't fit into one of those categories, then you would go to other, and then you're going to free form it in. A lot of times we hate the other field with free forms because you just know as well as I do, it's hard to extract data from a consistency standpoint on a free form field. So we tried to capture as many of the things through stakeholder engagement that CMS did, that the RAND Corporation did, to try to tease out as many of these different revenue streams that you could plug and play into so we could mix it and we could actually crosswalk it as much as possible on an aggregate reporting basis. Any questions about that? Yes.
So you mentioned SAFER grant. SAFER grants are a reimbursable grant. You expend, and then the feds reimburse you. Now, we have a transaction, we expended it before June 30, we're on a fiscal year July 1 to June 30. On our financial statements, we report a revenue with a receivable because we've earned that SAFER grant.
Perfect.
But you're saying the SAFER grant isn't going to be reported for this purpose until the reporting period in which we actually receive the cash.
That is correct.
So we're not even going to report for this purpose then the capital expenditure that's attributed to that SAFER grant, because that capital expenditure occurred prior to this reporting period.
So you have to pay for it first, and then you get reimbursed after the fact.
Correct.
Crap.
Well, it would be depreciated.
Still a cost. So, well, but he can't report the cost though. Well, wait a minute. Are you doing accrual?
You'll be depreciated.
Well, yeah, we're accruing, we've accrued.
Is it a
revenue.
capital expenditure?
It's a piece of, it's a
Yeah.
capital.
Okay, so you're going to have whatever it is. Tell me what you bought.
Geez,
The vehicle. Let's
I don't-
just.
I don't remember what it was.
So let's say it's a vehicle.
Yeah.
Then you would then that vehicle you would record into the vehicle, and then it would be depreciated out.
So you're gonna record the depreciation
Yeah.
expense, but
Yeah.
not the
That's correct.
purchase of it.
That is correct. Because you didn't purchase it in the year of the reporting period, unfortunately. Unfortunately. Any other nuance? And these are going to be good things as we go through. Remember too, unfortunately, CMS was not able to, and I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca because we're going to kind of end up here, but remember, they were not able to do a full beta testing of this instrument because of time. And that was our concern from day one. It was in the final rule as well, to make sure that we give ourselves some leeway that based upon that first pass of data, that if it's not good, they should not be making it public and transparent. So that is an issue that the association is continuing to work on. We will be having a meeting with them, working through the actual timeline of when they actually report this data, because our issue here right now is not really relevant to just Medicare and MedPAC looking at the data to rebase our rates and figure out are they paying us appropriately. But remember who else would have access to data like this? Your local government, your state governments, insurance companies. Some people are talking about your competitors, even though it's on an aggregate basis as well. And so if the information is not looked at in context and it's wrong, and we may be able to defeat it on the federal level, but guess what? That doesn't mean anything. That Blue Cross Blue Shield doesn't look at it and say, I've been paying them this, I don't have to pay them that anymore, let's do this. Or your local government is saying, you know what, we've been doing X, Y, Z, or your citizens see something, or somebody else sees something and saying, wait a minute, what is this that's going on in this local community? So remember, there's positives to data, but there's also unintended consequences. And so this first pass of data is a little concerning to us because they did not do a full beta testing on this tool, because there's going to be lots of nuances that we begin to see. So as you begin to get into it and you see certain things, you need to bring this to our attention or what have you. And I'm going to turn that over to Rebecca to close or whatever, but we've got a lot of things, and get the information free-flowing because we're keeping ourselves in constant contact with CMS as we do this.
Thank you. So I know we've given you guys a lot of information really quick. So as just kind of as a reminder, we've got ambulancereports.org, and I'm going to put that up on the screen. It's in your handouts as well. Amber is a software that is going to be available if you guys are interested in it. And I don't know if I told you this earlier, but it is a third-party vendor. American Ambulance Association will not have any access whatsoever to any of your data, ever. We don't want it, we don't need it, but I just want to make sure that you guys understand that if you elect to use the software, I think you're really going to like it, but don't worry about your information. It's held in a third party with all the appropriate disclaimers and waivers and all that, and we don't have access to that. So what is next? We went through the timeline. November 1st was when they put out the final rule and picked the winners. And then May 2021 is going to be when the first services that report on a calendar year are going to be due to have their data in. May 2022 is when the second round of services have to report. Here's the problem. If you remember when we talked about the 5-year extension, that ends December 31st of 2022, which is several months before MedPAC's report is due to the Congress. So AAA has introduced a bill to make the Medicare extenders permanent. We're watching that. We're working on that this year. And so hopefully before time runs out and before MedPAC has their final report due, we'll have the extenders permanent, we hope. So there's the address, ambulancereports.org. That's where you can contact any of us. That's where the information is, the 855B information, how to sign up for the listserv. And again, I know that we have given you guys a ton of information really, really quickly, but we do appreciate your attentiveness and some great interaction and questions. Do we have any final questions before we let you guys get on with the rest of your meeting? Yes, ma'am.
So is this up and running so we can start entering like our?
Amber is finalizing the beta testing, and so probably, I think in the next 10 days or so, it'll be up and running.
For Amber, and that's going to be kind of the thing that's going to be the ghosting, so we can get the access to the data first to see, hey, wait a minute, there is data that's beginning to show that it looks like inaccurate reporting. Or it might say, if this is accurate, we're in trouble. Holy Moses, industry, we need to get to work on some initiatives and be proactive.
Right. Oh, and the other thing too is if you use Amber, you'll get benchmarking.
Yeah.
So-
And you'll get benchmarking as well, which is a good thing that our industry's been wanting.